All right, for this edition here of Mic Drop on Pittsburgh Sports Live and Steelers Now, we're going to take a little bit of a serious tone here, but I think we have to. I think that's the way of the world right now, and we're going to touch on a lot of the current events and now of the last week or so and what's happened really since the murder of George Floyd and the trickle-down effect that actually now involves the National Football League and some comments made by some prominent players and how that'll trickle down to the locker room and maybe even how that potentially could affect your Pittsburgh Steelers. Again, I'm Mike Asti here, your host, and for this edition of the program here, I'm going to be joined by a friend and colleague of mine who I've done some work with in different outlets, but this now the first time we get to have him aboard PSL. So without any further ado, I am going to introduce former Pitt All-American, former NFL player, and my media colleague, part-time host also at 93.7 The Fan, Dorin Dickerson. Dorin, how you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. Doing well. We figured out here. I moved into a new place here with my girlfriend not long ago, so we figured out we're not too far from each other. So we're gonna have to do a wing night here. Now that is allowed, because now we're in the green phase, so that's back happening again. Either that or get on the golf course, as I've been happy to do that recently, since the governor has finally realized that you can golf alone, and that is okay. I think there was some confusion there prior that you could fish and not golf, so that's over with, I guess. So at least because I also think it's, as I said in the lead-in, it's necessary that we all have releases. If you like to golf or if you like to go have some wings, we need those now more than ever before, really. Sitting at home and with your thoughts probably is not the best right now with what's going on in the world. But Dorin, I want to start things off here with what we have to start off, and this really is not so much about the play on the field as the normal shows we've done with different outlets. But number one, Drew Brees' comments really have had some legs, and to where even his wife is making comments now. And Drew Brees, of course, making the now infamous comments that he still would not appreciate anyone kneeling for the flag, and he connected it to the armed forces and the military, and he didn't want them to be disrespected because his grandfather had served, and he basically kind of regurgitated the platform of 3 or 4 years ago. And he basically just re-administered that opinion that we all knew he had from 2017 when that was more of the hot topic issue. And I remember being at the Steelers facility trying to cover a press conference and having CNN there interrupting us. So it was kind of surreal. But Drew Brees kind of gave those same comments that we heard from many like him and him that time. And that, of course, just set the world on fire. I mean, and that is, again, that metaphorically speaking, after it almost was literally set on fire right before that. Number one, because we heard from a lot of Saints players, including Michael Thomas. We heard from players who were catching footballs from him, prominent figures, as well as players who were the last man on the roster and colleagues of his all across the NFL, that they didn't appreciate it. They were, again, against it. LeBron James came out pretty stern against Drew Brees, and Drew Brees has since apologized. But if you're a player in that NFL locker room and you're a teammate of Drew Brees even, once you hear that from Drew Brees, would there have been any hesitation from you to speak out? Or because of the way the world was and we were just coming off the George Floyd murder, we were just coming off of the riots, we saw those here in Pittsburgh, that you would have felt comfortable as well? Because you weren't Drew Brees, but there were players at your level or below your level when you were playing that felt comfortable to speak out. Would that have been different for you maybe because of the world right now to speak out against Brees, or would you still have had some trepidation because he's going to Hall of Fame and that could affect your family and your money?
Well, personally, I probably wouldn't have said anything, but I mean, that wouldn't take away from that being in the back of my mind whenever we reported to camp. That wouldn't take away to the fact that he said that and said things to the capacity that, you know, are not hurtful, but like, wow, like you would think somebody in your position, Drew Brees, Hall of Fame quarterback, like you said, wouldn't have said and would be more self-aware. Would be more self-aware of a situation and politically correct. You never thought of a guy like Drew Brees to really speak his mind, especially on camera and especially, especially in an interview. So I was kind of shocked that, a guy of his stature a guy who's been around a long time, knows how to handle media, knows how to handle, PR things. So I was shocked. And especially that, 90% of his teammates, 85% of his teammates are black. I mean,
yeah. And the city that he plays in, New Orleans, is a predominantly African American city.
Right, exactly. And there's a lot of people in that city that look at Drew Brees for hope. He's the symbol of hope. Ever since 2006 and winning, whenever Katrina hit, and people looked at Drew Brees as this solid, person, athlete that did things the right way and really just wants to go out there and win. And I think it took a lot of people back whenever he said this, because you just didn't think that somebody like him would say something like that. You have, like I said, a lot of predominantly black players in the locker room, and it's crazy too, because people, whatever side you take with this. And Drew Brees, one thing that stuck out to me that he said was, my grandfather fought in the war. My grandfather was in the military. Well, so was my grandfather.
Right.
My grandfather fought probably right next to Drew Brees' grandfather. And same with, a lot of other African-American people who fought in the war. His grandfather wasn't the only person that fought in the war.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And this isn't about the flag. And that's really whenever we come full circle and talking about this, Colin Kaepernick kneeling wasn't about the flag. It was about what's going on right now. And the fact that Drew Brees is missing or missed that message, that kind of took me back a little bit and shocked me. And now he's going to have to rebuild his reputation and rebuild, being a teammate, because it's not going to be easy. They're going to go in there. Those Michael Thomases, Alvin Kamara's, they're all going to go in there and they're going to look and be like, hey, man. I mean, I'm just being honest.
No, that's definitely going to be the situation. And I think what you touched on is my first reaction. Obviously, I was surprised that he would say anything really, but I was mostly surprised that he didn't have more awareness, because this is even what I said with Mason Rudolph being accused of shouting racial slurs on the field, that I'm not going to say somebody's racist unless I have proof that they're racist. But let me put it this way. I'll even play devil's advocate on both stances. Say you believe Mason Rudolph and Drew Brees to be racist. You'd have to also believe they're complete idiots if they're going to say racial slurs in the middle of a field with African-American teammates who defended Mason Rudolph or opponents. And then Drew Brees, knowing he has African-American players and a black receiver who he heavily relies on with 100 catches a couple years ago, like that's his bread and butter for his money. You would think that he would at least say, okay, maybe even if I am racist, I'm not going to say that. He would have been better off saying no comment or shutting the video off. And that might have looked weird, but it just was the timing was so bad that I even did some research thinking, oh, this has to be an old clip. This has to be 3 years ago. This can't be a new interview. And then no, it was. Like 48 hours after riots, he's out there saying the same thing. And yeah, all of our grandfathers served really with the way the world was at that point. Both of my grandfathers served. And really the unfortunate thing that I don't think Drew Brees realizes, but I'm sure you do, our grandfathers were out there, yours was, but it's very possible your grandfather was put in a much more dangerous situation, probably in a front line in front of our grandfathers because of the thought process of how things were then. But it doesn't take away from your grandfather serving. It just seemed very ignorant, which is what LeBron James said, and there was no self-awareness. Although Drew Brees claims now he's had an epiphany. He claims now he put his foot in his mouth. Now he has self-awareness. His teammates went after him. They had as we're doing now, we're on Zoom. They had a family Zoom session. Shaquille O'Neal, oddly enough, was a part of that apparently from all reports, and connected it to his rivalry with Kobe and not letting the media separate you. And now Michael Thomas is tweeting pictures of him and Drew Brees slapping high fives, and they all have said they accept the apology. Do you believe they truly accept this apology? You can't get in their minds, but what do you think really happened? Do you believe there was a family meeting that maybe they now believe more from Drew Brees, or there was something where they thought, I want to win a ring as well, and we got to fix this somehow? It just was a really quick change. And do you even believe Drew Brees' apology?
I believe him. I don't believe Drew Brees is a racist at all. I just think he wasn't really aware of the whole situation. And this is the best thing about football and football players. We are asked to take on heavy tasks, during a season, in the off season, and throughout a game, throughout playoffs.
Yeah.
And you're asked to put a lot aside to just accomplish a goal. So that is one of the best attributes a football player has, is being able to set things aside, even if it's good, if it's bad, to accomplish a goal. And I'm sure a lot of these guys have listen, I'm not going to have Drew Brees over for a cookout. But
okay.
in practice, we have to get a job done, and he is my teammate, and I'm willing to set aside. He did apologize. It's still in the back of my mind. Yeah. We're not going to be best friends, but he is the quarterback of the team, and he has the ability to lead us to Super Bowl, and that's where we all want to get to. So, like I said, one of the best attributes of being, a high-level athlete is putting things aside and focusing on your goals. Even family. I mean, think about, you don't even see your family for 6 months. You have to put them aside because, I'm not saying that they're not important, right, but you do owe your teammates your whole 100% attitude, 100% focus every day. And I do believe that they will set this aside and they will try to go out there and win. But like I said, Drew Brees isn't getting invited to that many cookouts the next couple months.
And I also wouldn't be surprised, but he's obviously older. Whenever he does retire, I wouldn't be shocked if Michael Thomas or whoever maybe gives their real feelings, but certainly not now, because when Drew Brees throws the football, if Michael Thomas swats it down and says, "I'm not catching that thing," he's done. Right. He's the one whose career's over, not Drew Brees. So, yeah, that's going to be the unfortunate situation that we're in now. But that has then segued into the NFL being in this hornet's nest, as they always are, involved in these race relations. And, of course, we know the Colin Kaepernick story and how he's still not played since taking a knee. And the NFL players came out, several prominent African-American NFL players came out with a video that was very powerful, basically asking the NFL to admit they were wrong, which is shocking because that's a lot of players putting themselves out there, and that was something that we didn't even see a few years ago. And then the NFL, again, to our surprise, but maybe kind of forced to do so PR-wise, Roger Goodell does his own little video and basically admits that the NFL was wrong. What did you take from all of that, though? Because there were still some that are criticizing Roger Goodell, saying that he basically found a way and a loophole to admit he was wrong without actually admitting he was wrong, because he did a 1.5-minute video apologizing without ever mentioning Colin Kaepernick's name one time.
Well, see, the NFL is always going to do the right thing of the perception of, people viewing, of the viewer perception. And that's what Roger Goodell thought he had to do. I don't know how sincere it was. I'm sure it was maybe 50-50. Okay. Nobody likes to be wrong, and especially nobody likes to be wrong, right? So I think he knew that he had to make a statement, and it's like, hey, I'll put it on me, I'll act like it was my mistake, because I mean, he already takes backlash every day, so he's like, here, just add to it. Okay, fine. Let's not stain the shield and give it to me. Give me all the me being the one that this happened to. So, I don't take it that serious. NFL does this all the time. They always make statements. They always do the right thing. They try to, at least, to make sure the shield looks good and nice and shiny. So I expected this to happen. And, I just take it with a grain of salt, to be honest, because they do things for money. They do things for just to look good most of the time.
Yeah, and that's what they've even said in the reverse when people get suspended. That was the Ben Roethlisberger suspension after the court case was dropped, that you did conduct detrimental to the shield. That's what the detrimental to the shield, which is just a vague term, but they stand behind the shield often. But now that Roger Goodell has admitted that he and the NFL were wrong, where do you believe this goes from here, or where would you like to see this go from here? Because it does appear that as much as there were outspoken African-American athletes years ago, obviously Colin Kaepernick, LeBron, his whole NBA contingent with Carmelo and Chris Paul, now it's even more. I mean, there are players who don't already have the mega deal that are feeling comfortable to speak. Everyone really is saying something, even if just on Twitter, and that is not even just including black players. That's including white players too, to make that clear. So it almost seems like Roger Goodell is going to be pushed in some direction, because the world's not going to drop this. They dropped it a few other times, but they're not going to drop this. Where do you think the NFL is going to go, and where would you like to see things go? Because, aside from forcing Colin Kaepernick to get a job and be back in the NFL, what really can be done?
Well, I think that, the direction for the players, I mean, they're going to keep protesting. They're going to take knees. I mean, it's going to be the highest frequency ever.
Of
The
knees,
start of the
do you
season.
expect that it's almost going to be unanimous? Every black player is going to be taking a knee whenever the NFL starts, or
I would assume so. And knowing the NFL and knowing Roger Goodell and knowing how, the owners operate, I can see them going away from the national anthem. I can see them just taking it away. They've done it before. I believe
right.
like in 2008, I think that's whenever they incorporated it into the game.
Yeah, it wasn't always there.
I think they could just, it wasn't always there, or it was, but I think
for Super Bowls, it wasn't for every week, I don't believe. Yeah.
Right. So I can see them going away from the national anthem and just getting rid of it at all. And before the game, you might see guys, looking like they're praying or something and peaceful protests, doing whatever they have to do, but it doesn't have to be attached with the flag, which
right.
If you have a half of a brain, you would know that at this point, it's not about the flag.
Right.
But let's not get things confused here. Let's not have guys sending mixed messages and, people thinking it's about the flag and people not. So I think they just get away with the whole national anthem as a whole.
Yeah, and it also would take away the argument, because even though it's not about the flag, if it isn't there, then that side can't bring anything up. It would take away some of the flame and the fire a little bit, which, although I'm sure there's going to be many that would criticize that move, because they're going to say you're backpedaling off of what clearly you just want to get rid of it rather than have to address the actual issue there. Is there any chance of Colin Kaepernick almost having this help him get back in the league in some way, because of Eric Reid continuously speaking out, and he has had contracts, but he was right there with Colin Kaepernick taking a knee right when Colin took a knee. Not to say Colin would want it this way, but could somehow this movement for equality somehow maybe force someone's hand to try to even bring him back in as a PR move?
I don't know. It would look as like a charity case, honestly, at this point to me.
I don't think it would look good. I don't even know.
It wouldn't look good. And can he really play? I mean, he's been out of the league for so long. I mean, he's playing a high-level elite position, too. It's not like you're bringing back a receiver who still can run a 4.5, 4.40. You're playing quarterback. I mean, you have to be in tune with the game to be a consistent quarterback. And he's been away for so long. I don't even know if he can even – help a team. I mean, is he a quality backup right now? I don't know. I mean,
yeah,
I saw him throwing shorts, a couple months ago, maybe last year. I can't even remember. Okay, you're throwing in shorts. You're not taking hits. You're not, facing blitzes. You're not reading coverages. You're not doing all the things you have to do to be a quarterback. So I don't even know if my man can play still. As cerebrally, maybe physically he can play. I don't know, but that's one thing that I would look at first. If I was a GM or if I was a head coach, I'm like, we need to bring him in here for a whole day and put him through every single workout and every single situation we could think of that a quarterback will experience in a game, and we'll see if he can play, and then we'll move to the next steps of if we want to sign him. I think he needs to prove he could be, a legit backup at this point.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because I think that's a point that's been lost, because every single time a backup quarterback enters a game, and we saw that a lot with the Steelers season this past year, especially if a backup quarterback doesn't play well, again, with the Steelers season towards the end, or any starter gets hurt, it's, Colin Kaepernick could do better than that. Colin Kaepernick should be out there. Why didn't you sign Colin Kaepernick? But in reality, that might have been more of a reasonable thing to say the first year or so. But at this point, we're 3, almost 4. We're going to be 5 years at that point, almost away from it. Then I don't care who you are. If Brady sits out for 5 years, I don't think I'm signing him afterwards. Like, at some point, you got some rust. At some point, you're not dealing with, if you're not actually out there playing NFL football, that's not the same as playing with your friends in the backyard or playing in a beer league. It's not the same. So at this point, I feel like he no longer really would be helping you on the field, or at least that'd be a risk. And again, and I said this on Twitter and got some flack for this, but I almost feel like it'd be a little demeaning to him at this point to sign him, because, again, you don't know about his level of play, and then it would totally come off like you were only signing him because of the murder of George Floyd, which that doesn't look good. And I don't even know if Colin Kaepernick would take a job at this point, because again, that would feel that way. Speaking with Dorin Dickerson here, a colleague of mine here in Pittsburgh media. He's a part-time host at 93.7 The Fan, former Pitt All-American, of course, former NFL player, which, Dorin, before I get you out of here, I got to ask this. during your years in the NFL, even during your years in college and playing football and growing up here in Western Pennsylvania and playing high school ball here in the WPIL, what were your experiences in terms of race relations? Because you obviously were having success as a good athlete, or you would not have been able to play pro. You were an All-American at Pitt. You had success. But did you feel you were treated any differently because of the color of your skin? Did you feel like maybe that didn't apply to you because you were so good, where other players who maybe had the same skin tone as you but weren't as good as you were treated worse? What were your experiences like dealing with race relations, either inside a locker room or outside? And I do ask this in connection with another comment that we heard recently from Fangio, and he got some flack saying he did not believe there was racism at all in the National Football League. And then we later heard from people that he really was talking about an NFL locker room, which you kind of brought up, that a locker room kind of does take care of and police itself, that they're not going to put up with racism in a locker room, and it probably doesn't exist because it's really about if you're good or not. If Drew Brees sucked, he probably would have just been bounced off the team, but he's a Hall of Famer, so they're going to try to deal with him even if they think he's racist, and that's how the locker room moves. But what were your experiences, and is Fangio correct there in terms of the locker room, that it's a different animal than the rest of the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, growing up, I grew up in a predominantly white area. Went to West Allegheny High School. I was treated really well. But yeah, whenever I started playing football and having some success, I do believe that I was a little bit privileged and treated different. I do believe that. I believe that to this day, even throughout college. Getting to the NFL, I never experienced any racism in the locker room. Like you said, we policed ourselves. And I mean, let's face it. I mean, the locker room is about 80% of African-American players, So, I mean, if you're going to be a racist,
it's going to be rough.
I mean, it's going to be rough, I mean, so I don't think that goes on that much, especially on the player side. I don't know about the coach's
You never
side.
wondered about – did you ever wonder about even a coach? Or, I mean, you don't have to name names, obviously, but did you ever think in the back of your mind, he might have made that decision because he believes this, or I'm concerned that maybe he's a racist? Did that ever pop in your mind?
Yeah, that's popped in my mind before. But you know what? I still had to play, and I still had to go out there and make plays, and I had to do what I had to do to stay around, because in the NFL, they don't give out favors. You're there to help a team win. I mean, nothing's a charity case in the NFL. But going back, so my uncle was one of the first African-American head coaches in college football. And I had a conversation with him about 3 years ago, just asking about his, journey. And he started at Kansas State, and, he coached at Pitt, coached at Penn State, coached at Clemson, coached all over the place. And he was like, my early days, and, you're thinking about, the 70s. It's like, in my early days, I was one of the only, African-American assistants, in college football. So there was places where I couldn't go. When I was coaching at Kansas State, there was bars, if coaches went out to the bars, I couldn't go. If coaches, we went on trips to recruit people, I couldn't go to certain houses because I was black. And, so my uncle, who was a staple in college football and staple for African-Americans and breaking through, and especially coaches like Mike Tomlin. I mean, you ask anybody about him, he was the first one to break through. He experienced a lot of, direct racism that, he had to endure, and, he had to, be quiet, and he had to just play his role and do what he had to do. And he really opened doors for a lot of other African-American coaches that has come through the ranks and is still trying to be head coaches in the NFL and in college. So, he is somebody that I look to, like, myself, I didn't experience that much. I don't think. Maybe I was too naive because I was a football player, but, he is somebody that really had to fight for his position and fight for his name and fight for his skin color. So, I owe a lot of credit to my uncle, Ron Dickerson, who, was a person and a staple in college football. So it's terrible that he had to go through it, but, he really opened a lot of doors for people.
Yeah, and that's interesting. He absolutely did. And in that era, you're going to feel a lot of that because that's around the time. I mean, his career was a little bit after this, but that's around the time where you see Bill Russell, Muhammad Ali, and they had that summit of the best African-American athletes at that time, realizing the problem and trying to fix things then. And unfortunately, we're here where we are today, over 40 years later. But the attempt was really being made at that point, and they weren't far from Jackie Robinson and having to break the color barrier. So that was still fresh in the mind. And I actually watched the movie Help. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Help. It was it's about women mostly, but it's about women who were basically maids for white families, and they were getting paid, but it was almost paid slavery in a way where they weren't treated as equal, but they were receiving money, and it was happening down south. It was in Old Miss area basically, and off of that, the boosters of that college. So I mean, that's a good movie to watch. I definitely would recommend it, but it really shows you that area that even when we're supposed to be equal, it was separate but equal. But even that phrase is wrong because it's not. It was separate, but it wasn't equal anyway. So even anyone who was a proponent of separate but equal, it literally wasn't equal. It was two separate things that weren't equal in the first place. So that area
kind of what it's like now. So
yeah, I mean it kind of is. It kind of is still that way. Do you have any hope for change? I mean, is this as horrible as the events of the George Floyd murder are, and anything that else has happened, Breonna Taylor being another example? Do you have more hope today than you ironically maybe had 30 days ago because shows like this are talking about it, other shows are talking about this more that would not be doing so? It's out there all the time. And the only criticism that really, or not a criticism, the only thing I maybe could have moved this forward, maybe even help Kaepernick, is back when that was going on, somebody of a LeBron James level, instead of just tweeting or even donating or doing things, could you imagine if LeBron James took a knee when Colin Kaepernick was doing it? Would that have had a greater impact? Those things might actually happen now. Does this provide more hope to you because of what happened, as awful as that was to get us here, maybe?
Yeah, I have to have hope. I have to be, optimistic about the future. I have 3 young sons. They're African-American sons. So I don't have a choice. If it was just me, I don't know. I'd just be like, hey, listen, I'm 32 years old and I'm just going to keep living my life. But I have to try to talk to my kids and make sure that if their peers aren't leaders, then they have to be the leaders. And if they can do things the right way and know what's right and wrong, and that could be contagious to other people, then they are becoming the leaders that I hope for them to be. And I hope for change. So it's really, in my mind, I don't know if it's going to change now, but whenever my kids become, 20 years old, 25, 30 years old, I hope that this next generation coming up will have a sharper head on their shoulders, a clear vision of what's right and what's wrong, because that's really what we're talking about here. We could go into race, we could go into color, we can go into white, we can go to black. Let's just keep it simple. It's the things that me and you learned whenever we were in kindergarten. What's right and what's wrong. It's really not that hard. It really isn't. So I hope that this next generation can grasp that and become the leaders that we expect, now, but hopefully they can be the leaders that we need in this country.
Yeah, and I hope so too. But the sad thing, in a way, hearing you say that, it almost was a connection a little bit to Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, where he, 40 plus 50 years ago, was saying that he had a dream that, forget him, but he had a dream that his son would have a different world and have equality. But that didn't happen. We're here in 2020, and you at 32 are basically looking for the same dream for your kids. That's a long trek from where Martin Luther King was. And that's I'd imagine he'd be quite disappointed with the situation that has unraveled since that speech, and he was taken out for his words. But yeah, we do hope that that's the case. And I will say one thing, as somebody who's white here, that I myself in my generation, and certainly our kids' generation and generations from now on, they're not going to have any excuse. Not that anybody would ever have an excuse to be racist, but my grandfather's generation, it's not acceptable if he's racist, and he's not, but at least you can say, well, that was how it was then. He probably did have that instilled from his parents, who were not far from there not even being equality, and not far. His father, I don't know exactly offhand, but my grandfather's 97, so you're looking at his father being in the 1800s. So at that point, they weren't far from the Civil War and things like that. So okay, that trickled down to him. If that happened, that's unfortunate, but that's one thing. But there's no excuse for that trickling down any further. With everything that we're hearing, with everything going on, or every second news cycle, social media, and everything that's happening now in this groundswell since George Floyd murder, which should have happened off of Michael Brown and several others, but it at least has happened now, that it's not. There's no excuse anymore. No one can say, well, that's just his generation. He's old. Just ignore him. that's not going to work for myself or our kids. Or that's not going to be able to be heard any further. And Dorin, again, I appreciate you doing this. Just lastly, to get you out of here, any thoughts on what are your thoughts on? Because Sidney Crosby spoke out recently. I know that you actually tweeted about this. You really wanted it. He did say something. You were happy with what he said. But Sidney Crosby, players like him, Michael Jordan, we watched The Last Dance. This is kind of how he rolled in his career, where he actually made the comment that Republicans buy Nikes too. And I'm trying to make my money off those Nikes. So I'm not going to alienate half of the, maybe even majority of the fan base out there. And there have been many athletes over the years, prominent athletes, Hall of Fame, legendary athletes that have just chosen not to speak. Even African Americans not speaking about things that are persecuting their own race. Now, do you expect that more? And will you be disappointed if the Tom Brady's of the world, the Sidney Crosby's of the world stay quiet? Is there more of a responsibility of players at that level to speak? Or will you still be okay with somebody who doesn't go the Brees route, but says, I just no comment. I can't say anything there, kind of tries to dance around it because Republicans, again, do buy Nikes. Do you want something said, though, more? Is there more responsibility now?
The response. See, I didn't expect Sidney Crosby to say anything. I get where his stance and where any white person of predominant stature stance would be. Like, right. I don't even want to get in the middle of it. I get that. I totally get that. But it's like, wow, if you really did, it's like, Mike, if you really did speak out, you're not even black. You're not even African American. If you said something and people look at you in this light and they love you, if you did say just one little thing, we would be getting somewhere. We'd be taking a step in the right direction. It's like, you don't have to, but like, man, if you did, like, we are moving forward. And that's what I was so happy whenever Sidney Crosby did say something. I'd expect him to. That's fine. He's a hockey player. He's from Canada. All the, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So one of my, I love him to death. I love him as an athlete, but I didn't expect him to say anything. But I was like, man, if he did say something, then we are getting somewhere. So I think that now that you have seen somebody like Sidney Crosby speak up, you have seen some of these, these white athletes, entertainers, celebrities speak up. I think that might become the new norm. Or hopefully we won't have to go through this again. Let's hope that.
Well, right.
Let's hope we don't have to go through this again. And if it did happen again, I think that a lot more white predominant, athletes, celebrities will take the responsibility of speaking up and knowing what's right and wrong.
Yeah, and it's always been too that because there are a lot of people out there, especially in our last couple political elections, that they almost want their favorite celebrity and favorite athletes to agree with them politically, which is dangerous because, as we know, if you hear what your favorite athlete or celebrity feels, you may be regretting hearing it. That's a risk. With Drew Brees, for example, I'm sure there are a lot of Saints fans thinking, I want Drew Brees to speak out because he's going to agree with me and defend me. And then you hear him and say, Brees, it'd been better if you didn't say anything at all. So it does come with a risk. But I do feel like, and what we talked about at the beginning of the show, that any athletes who potentially are racist or do believe what actually Drew Brees said initially before his apology, they'll just keep quiet because that would be a horrible PR move to even say that right now, obviously, with some sense of awareness. And the majority, we hope, and the ones that are not racist and don't have that in their heart would then speak up. And speak up, I think it was big for Crosby too because he spoke up without having to issue an apology or put his foot in his mouth. Right. Drew Brees speaking up's not as good right now.
Right.
Sidney Crosby spoke up just out of nowhere, and no one really expected it. And
he didn't have to.
He didn't have to. There are some though. So what do you say though to those who basically say, because you always have been, you take more of a logical opinion even when you have your opinions, but there are some, and we see this on Twitter, that do legitimately get mad if a Sidney Crosby-like player, especially a white top athlete, does not speak out. So what would you say to fellow African Americans who actually would be pissed if a Tom Brady is not, because he has yet to, does not speak out?
Well, it's really that simple. Like, this is not I'm not going to say it's not his issue, but I mean, it's not his place to have to speak on this. He is a hockey player. He's demonstrated that year in and year out since 2005, whenever he got drafted. All he talks about whenever he's doing interviews is hockey.
Yeah.
And, he's a guy, this is not his place. And you don't want to put somebody in an uncomfortable situation, and talking about issues that you're not really educated on.
Yeah,
Maybe
that's
Sidney
the
was
worst. That's Drew Brees. Yeah.
Right. Like maybe Sidney was like, listen, I'm going to just be honest. I'm not that educated on everything that's going on. I'm not educated on the history of Black people. I'm not educated. And that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
That's all right. And maybe he was like, this isn't the time for me to go out to say something. If I say something wrong, then I'm going to look even worse. So he took the time. People were calling for his name to speak. He took the time. Probably, who knows what he did, but he's very smart, obviously intelligent, and he said the right thing. And now look, I mean, he's just being Sidney Crosby and being awesome.
Yeah, and I think that's big too, because, and I will say, the other end is, as much as you don't want to speak if you're not educated on something, because ignorance is the worst thing out there. So you're better on there. There are some situations where you are better off saying no comment, even though we don't like to hear someone say no comment when we're interviewing them. I would prefer a no comment than a racist comment. So that is true. And if you're not sure if what you're about to say might be taken as racist, you're better off not saying it. That is absolutely true. Don't press send like Herm Edwards. That is definitely a true statement these days. But I think everyone can agree that when you have the evidence in front of you and you watch a video, that doesn't matter what color your skin are, doesn't matter what you did, even if you committed some crime and were stopped by the police, there's really no way to possibly somehow argue that somebody need to have someone's knee put on their neck for 8+ minutes. There's no possible way. Charles Manson, I would actually say, would also not have had that happen. Like, even if you're a convicted felon and a murderer,
right,
the police are not supposed to extinguish you and kill you themselves, because obviously you're not a threat to them while they're restraining you with their knee. So we hope that things do progress off of the horrible events that have occurred. We also gotta hope that justice is paid that, say, wasn't paid to those in the early 90s, and even off of more recent events that led to different riots and different issues that we heard. Justice was not paid. We know about 1992 and those cops getting off, even though there was a video, and videos did not come out then. So the only way this would get worse is if somehow justice is not paid. Then I could see the powder keg being blown off yet again. So we have to hope the justice is paid and we can all move on from here. Dorin, I definitely appreciate the time for sure. I'm happy to talk to you. We'll definitely have to go get some wings or get on the golf course, or Top Golf's right now in our backyard. I like being near Top Golf. I'm a big fan of that here. I got to give you the floor though. Any final words or any final thoughts, whether it be to me, fans, anybody, just about what's going on, or just anything in general?
No, I appreciate you having me on, and what's right and what's wrong. I mean, I have a lot of hope for the future. I have a lot of hope for humanity and society. It's just sad that this is where we're at, and it's sad that some of us, like myself, have to raise kids in this this society of America. There's too much division. There's too much discrimination. If I get a cut on my arm or you get a cut on your arm, you bleed red. I bleed red. So right. We're all human beings, and let's start treating each other with respect, and let's move forward and be the country that everybody always dreamed about being, the greatest. So, and I do believe we can get there someday together. United States of America, united.
Yeah, I believe so too. I hope so too. And I heard somebody say this recently, that do you think the cashier at the son of the cashier at Walmart would receive more privilege if that person's white than Mike Tomlin's son? Well, if they're both in a dark alley and you don't know exactly who their father is, you don't have any connection to them, and you just see them, there probably would have been a privilege for that white cashier's son, when normally that wouldn't be the case. So we'll see, but hopefully we can move on. Hopefully we can progress, and hopefully there is some positive light in the midst of all of this. But again, I definitely appreciate it. And yeah, we'll have to get together sometime here where we can talk about some Pitt WU. You can. I remember the first time we ever did a show was the anniversary of 2007, and you spent an hour on the trip where you were making fun of me about that, and then we progressed since then. So that might have been my initiation for you to be cool with me, that I put up with that. I brought you on, and I took it on and let you give it to me, and now we're
13-9. 13-9.
Yeah.
I appreciate it, man. I'll talk to you.
No problem. Thanks, man.
All right. Thanks.
That was Dorin Dickerson, friend and colleague of mine, and he's been very, very logical in a lot of his takes out there, but especially about this. So I definitely appreciate it, and I do think that's some words of wisdom and a lot for you guys to sink in. So, and I even let him. I opened up the floor there and gave him a softball down at the end there. I know we got a lot of Pitt subscribers here on Pittsburgh Sports Live, since Pittsburgh Sports Now was the mothership. So I had to do it for you guys to get the 13-9 out there for the former Pitt All-American being on this broadcast. But again, that was a special edition here of Mic Drop on Pittsburgh Sports Live, and of course Steelers Now. Former Pitt All-American, former NFL player, and friend and colleague, part-time host at 93.7 The Fan, Dorin Dickerson, was on with me, and really we had a real conversation. He touched on some poignant things that I knew I was going to get from him, and I'm glad we were able to do this. It's been a while. We've been trying to plan this. Life kind of got in the way. So I think it was still a very relevant topic and discussion with everything that's gone on, because Drew Brees and his wife and others keep either apologizing or putting their foot in their mouth to unfortunately keep making this show relevant, although hopefully it won't be, because we will eventually progress, and there is hope that I'm glad Dorin has for at least his kids' generation. But again, it shouldn't be to this point, because Martin Luther King was saying that 40 plus years ago. And again, I even will admit that I was somebody way back when Colin Kaepernick was taking a knee. I didn't really like it because I thought it was disrespecting the flag. I did want it to happen a different way. I did know that my family and grandfathers had connection with the war, and my one grandfather having a Purple Heart. But I've since learned and adapted and realized that that was not the issue, and that that's not a connection to it, and that is a peaceful form of protest, which is what even the other side would want, and everybody kind of agrees that that's something that has been true to the country forever. That's not a violent form of protest. That's not doing any destruction. That's not hurting anybody. That is a peaceful form of protest that seemingly both sides of the aisle agree that that's better than the reverse. So to pick on a peaceful form of protest when protest is a part of the American way, especially for what it was, and it was not about the flag at all, despite it being wrapped up into that as kind of a diversion. It's a little bit of a unfortunate thing for Drew Brees to say. It's unfortunate for anybody who still believes that, but hopefully, as Dorin says, there is a chance that these horrible events, the murder of George Floyd and others, will get us to a further direction and improve us as a people. Because again, as Dorin said, he's black, I'm white, we both get a cut, we both bleed red. So we are one race, and we are the same in that respect. Want to make sure you guys hit up the family of networks. Again, that is Dorin's team, is Dorin's alumni. He's a former Pitt All-American. As you know, the Pitt coverage is over there, as well as high school coverage and all the other Pittsburgh college athletics over there. Pittsburgh Sports Now, pittsburghsportsnow.com also. And I'll give it to myself, the rival of Dorin, the WVSportsNow.com, which is a newer member of the family there, WVSportsNow.com. Of course, here, SteelersNow.com. There's PittsburghHockeyNow.com, PittsburghSoccerNow.com. And make sure to hit us up here on YouTube and down below. Click on the subscribe button on the video. Help us get the content to you. Help us keep paying the bills here at Pittsburgh Sports Live. Find us on Facebook at Pittsburgh Sports Live, on Twitter at PGH Sports Live, on Twitter at PGH Steelers Now on Twitter, because of course this show will also be found SteelersNow.com and PGHSportsLive.com. So again, appreciate the time. I appreciate the time from Dorin. And again, hopefully, as horrible as this has been recently and as eye-opening it has been, hopefully this can all spark change.